if somebody has never read Percy Jackson before and you have to give them a chapter, you could give them this chapter, chapter 11. Tell them it's just a short story and they will want more. This has literally everything. This is the most condensed, concise version of what Percy Jackson is, and it does it so beautifully.
Hello, and welcome to Notes from the Oracle. I'm Connor, and together with Jack, my co-host from Cabin 6, we're going beyond Half-Blood Hill to take a closer look at the electrifying mythology of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief. Chapter 11, we visit the Gnome Emporium. All right, back at it. Hopping in,
Back
more
at it.
action.
That's right. Percy and co. just got done blowing up a bus. They've barely even left Manhattan and only just crossed over into New Jersey. And they've already got a battery of terrorism charges, potentially homicide, manslaughter.
It has not been a good short day for them. Maybe it's been a very long day. That's the one thing that I will say off the bat from a timeline perspective that jumped out to me about this chapter. This is the same evening as the bus thing. I always thought that there was at least like one night of camping between. That is miserable.
They get screwed over. It's back to back to back. Because again, remember, Connor, they have like 6 days. I also keep forgetting that. I also keep forgetting that Chiron, we're not even like a minute into this, and I'm already shitting on Chiron. Don't forget, Chiron just totally shit the bed, said, yeah, I got time. And he didn't have time. So now, yes, they just got off of the bus with 3 Furies, the kindly ones. Zeus tried to smite them, missed somehow, blew up the bus instead. And Connor, I really, really, really enjoyed this chapter.
Me
I
too.
think
It was fun.
this chapter, and when we do our chapter roundup, I'll go a bit more in depth with it. But this might be my favorite chapter. It's really duking it out with Capture the Flag. And I will say, I think this is my favorite chapter, at the very least tied for first, because if you were to give this, just chapter 11, to somebody who had never read Percy Jackson before, didn't know what it was, didn't know who the characters were, nothing about it, blank slate, and said, read these 20 pages, they'd be hooked. It is a super fun, concise, mysterious story all within one chapter that has a really good beginning, middle, and end. And it's just this little piece of mini adventure that really, really reminded me why I love these books. I've been reminded for other reasons, but this chapter was like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff. This is where we get all the cool character interactions. This is where we get the best banter. This is where we get some action. This is where we get some intrigue. This is where we get some dread. You get a little spookiness going on.
This is quintessential Percy Jackson. I agree that the chapter it is competing with most in my head is Capture the Flag. And I think from the perspective of the grandiosity of Capture the Flag, that one still is just eking this one out for me. But I'll fully agree that this is an amazing chapter. It's so much fun. And I like that you pointed out that some of the things that really stood out, because that's what stood out to me, is the banter. It's the characterization here. And I think what really makes the characterization work better in this chapter specifically is that they have something so pertinent to talk about. They are on their toes the whole time. The moment they arrive at Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, they are having to be on alert. And so it gives all of these wonderful chances for interaction. But even just leading up to it, you mentioned the chapter had a solid beginning, middle, and end. And I'm sure that I or you say this pretty frequently when we're like, oh, this chapter had a great hook. Like it had a great opening. This chapter has one of the best ones.
Oh, it's so good.
I love the way that it ends with, when you're a half-blood, you understand that some divine force really is trying to mess up your day. And it summarizes everything that Percy Jackson is trying to say from a thematic
Yeah,
standpoint about the gods in a one sentence, and I love it. In half a sentence.
wholeheartedly agree. I think Rick really does well. I almost said Shine again. I for some reason keep wanting to say Shine. Rick does really, really well in this chapter with the internal dialogue of Percy and his colored commentary, and he's done a really good job in the prior chapters, but I think this is where it really reigns supreme. And I agree. The first paragraph is so fun. In a way, it's nice to know there are Greek gods out there because you at least have somebody to blame when things go wrong. For instance, when you're walking away from a bus that's just been attacked by monster hags and blown up by lightning, and it's raining on top of everything else, most people think that's just really bad luck. When you're a half blood, you understand that some divine force really is trying to mess up your day. The nonchalance of it is so funny. It's so good.
I just like that you can tell he's been at this questing shit for a day, and he's like, I get it. I get it.
Yeah,
You guys suck.
he understands it now.
Leave me alone. I am just
Yeah,
trying to get from one place to another, and I have been dragged through the fucking mud. Give me a break. And it's so
it's not
fun.
even dinner time yet.
It's not even dinner time yet. They're starving. And
That's
frankly,
right.
I think that what makes the color commentary so good this chapter is because he's starting to get sick of the things that are going on.
Mhm.
And because there is, again, so much happening that it's just like, yeah, of course you've got a lot to say, Percy. This shit sucks. I'd be
It's
upset
act.
too.
And
It's
I love
really
how
fun.
they're licking their wounds and just walking along the dirty, nasty Hudson. This is not I've said the Hudson River Valley is very nice. We're in Jersey Hudson now. It sucks. It's nasty. And Grover is shivering and he's tweaking and he's scared and his it's has a terrifying image of his goat eyes literally looking like goat eyes. The pupils turn into slits
Mm-hmm.
and he's having a full-on panic attack because he just survived an encounter with not one Fury, but now all three. And we get yet another instance of Percy losing all of his belongings.
Poor guy.
I know! All their money, food, clothes, everything gone again. So now what little shit they were given to start is now inconsequential. Now they have nothing outside of the stuff they were carrying on their person in their pockets. And understandably so, tensions are a little high. The group is a bit unhappy. And Annabeth is looking for somebody to blame and makes a bit of a brash decision and blames Percy, saying, "You didn't need to protect me. What were you trying to do? Get yourself killed? I would have been fine." And Grover, see, this is how you know everybody's in a bad mood. Grover actually talks back to Annabeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, sliced like sandwich bread, but fine. And then Annabeth uses what I would have to assume is some sort of racial epithet or a slur by calling him Goat Boy. She says, "Shut up, Goat Boy." So, not Annabeth's best look, but bravo to Grover for standing up to Annabeth the one time that she was probably incorrect and is very clearly lashing out emotionally.
Yeah. That whole interaction is perfect. Like, I have no notes. The line sliced like sandwich bread, but fine, is perfect. And we are barely over a page into the chapter, and it's already hitting. And then it turns it right around from
Mhm.
snarky, angry tweens to Annabeth immediately realizing that what she did was out of line and following it up with her voice faltering. I appreciate you coming back for us, okay? That was really brave. I just, I love that you can see she thinks it through, she cools off, and now we can open the door for some genuine banter, some like character interaction that's going to give them an opportunity to breathe again. I feel like I say that a lot, but the characters need room to breathe and be characters. And this transition was so good. It shows us Annabeth getting that moment to kind of think herself through. It's really good. It's well done. She starts to talk about her dad with Percy because Percy asks, he says, "You haven't left Camp Half-Blood since you were 7?" And she says, "No, only short field trips." And it's because living at home didn't work out for Annabeth, unfortunately. So she doesn't have a place to go back to outside of summer. So she's just a year rounder. She lives there the full time. And it means that her world is really small, actually. And so
Mhm.
it's understandable why she's so eager to get the quest right. That's why she's the one who's lashing out most, right? Grover and Percy, they are aware that this is a life or death quest that has a goal. Annabeth's goal, to some extent, is not just questing, but getting to see the world. And so she would be more frustrated that the quest wasn't going well because, as you mentioned, Chiron has only given them like 10 to 6 days, somewhere in there. And so she doesn't have a lot of time. They have got to be extremely efficient with their quest if she actually wants to get to see any of the US.
And it's interesting you latch onto that aspect because while I agree, yeah, I think she does care about seeing the rest of the world, and I'm sure there is a wanderlust. I read that differently. And I read it specifically the last line she says. She talks about the real world is where the monsters are. That's where you learn whether you're any good or not. And I see this as more insight into, yeah, sure, seeing the world, that's all well and good, but she has something to prove, whether it's to herself or her mom or her dad or Luke or some combination of them or somebody that I'm not even thinking of, remains to be seen. But there is an ambition and a pride and an ego that has to be fed through this quest. She's
Oh,
doing this
definitely.
for a very unwise reason, which is glory, I think.
Yeah. I honestly, I don't think that you're wrong in that regard. I would probably come in somewhere with a middle ground of I think she is doing it for glory, but the glory is also optimal. And being optimal is also in part what she's looking to accomplish.
Of course.
It's interesting to see how she reacts compared to the boys, and it's very fun, and if nothing else, it does just give more opportunity for this lovely banter where finally they're starting to get back on the same page, and Percy says, "You're pretty good with that knife." And Annabeth says, "You think so?" And Percy, of course, now really hammering it home, anybody who can piggyback ride a Fury is okay by me. And they've made up for now. You get to see these first moments of them kind of getting proper connection and starting to understand one another. And it's really enjoyable, if nothing else.
Mhm. Yeah, that relationship building is huge in this chapter. Huge, and I loved, like, every second of it.
I also loved every second of just this chapter. I felt like, especially the lead up to the action, is just packed with jokes. And
Mhm.
I'm gonna point out some of my favorites. I will not get to all of them, but there is nothing funnier to me than whatever she wanted to say was interrupted by the shrill toot toot toot, like the sound of an owl being tortured. "Hey, my reed pipes still work," Grover cried.
Yeah,
It's just
he's trying to remember the
fantastic.
Find Path song, but instead, all he's got is Hilary Duff.
All he's got is Hillary Duff. I just very much enjoyed that.
I
Especially
am
knowing Grover is 26, so he's lived through the '80s and '90s. This is like when my parents put on music and they're like, "See?
Uh-huh.
This is what the kids like," and you're like, "I don't think anyone has listened to that for 10 years."
Well, this was 2005. Hilary Duff was definitely that was definitely a thing, right? Early 2000s? I think that would
I
she would
didn't
be at her
listen to
peak,
Hillary
if
Duff.
not crescendoing
Maybe.
over.
You're probably right. I'm
Besides the point.
honestly not gonna look it up. This is
Besides the
not of
point.
my concern, yeah.
You mentioned the humor, and I was genuinely shocked at how well the jokes landed. I, going into this reread, thought, there's probably gonna be some things that I kinda roll my eyes at now or don't find funny because I'm older, like, they'd be funny for kids.
Yeah.
Maybe I still have the sense of humor of, like, a 12-year-old. I don't think I do, but maybe that's the case. Alternatively, and what I think is the answer, Rick is just really fucking funny and is able to do a really good job at writing comedy.
Yeah. Honestly, I agree. the more we read and reread specifically, the more I think that this might have genuinely shaped my sense of humor. Because, like, every joke, especially in this first book, I have just gotten to and gone, all right, you got me again. And I find myself audibly giggling as I'm sitting there taking my notes and reading through the chapter. It's delightful, honestly.
The toot 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 in italics did get a really sharp nose exhale from me, which is high praise. I usually don't laugh at stuff that I read.
It's all really good. And then we record these around dinner time. I also read these usually right around dinner time. It was not
Yep.
fair to get this visceral description of delicious fries and burgers and fast food as Percy is like a Looney Tunes character wafting through the woods after the scent of this delicious food. Because apparently at Camp Half-Blood, and I referenced this earlier a little bit, where they say, I'd arrived at Half-Blood Hill where we lived on grapes, bread, cheese, and extra lean cut nymph prepared barbecue. This boy needed a double cheeseburger. And I get it. I've been there. There is nothing quite like when you are exhausted and tired going, I just need delicious food.
Yeah, I read this right before dinner, and the only note that I put in the margins is I am so fucking hungry. Uh, and it's true. It's so everything. It sounds so tantalizing, which was a great lead into what happens later in kind of the cheese that was put under the box trap that lured them into the Gnome Emporium.
Yep.
But to get there, we get to do a little bit of scene setting, and specifically one of my favorite tropes. I love a good road trip. And I love the way that Rick sets up that the group is walking along this deserted 2-lane road through the trees. And then on the other side of the road, there's a closed down gas station and a tattered billboard for a 90s movie that's been left up because it's just been forgotten about. And one open business has a neon light sign, and there was a good smell. I like to imagine that the 90s movie was Anaconda. I think that would be
Topical.
very apt. But this is just so fun. Again, it's a little thing. It's not even necessarily the most eloquent bit of dialogue or bit of writing. I just love that it sets like it's very Stand By Me. There are a group of kids walking down a deserted old highway, and there's a bunch of old forgotten Americana around
You could
them.
picture it. Honestly, it's
Oh
like the
yeah.
platonic ideal for a teen movie,
Yes.
which is crazy that they effed it up so bad then.
But we gotta keep talking about good things.
We do.
We gotta talk about how good this stuff smells and how bad Annabeth and Percy are at reading. Percy's reading this sign and it's a mess. And then we learn Annabeth also can't read. She loves reading, but can't read English, which Connor, I am not an expert when it comes to dyslexia. I don't think it makes you outright illiterate, but maybe I'm wrong. Do you have any insights into that?
So I myself am not dyslexic, but I have known people that are. And actually, what got me about this one in particular is I have a friend and they have mentioned that it gets worse the more tired you get. So when we were
Mm.
in college, we would work on homework assignments late into the night. And at a certain point, they would be like, we've been working too long. And I'd go, yeah. And they would go, I literally cannot read this anymore.
Okay.
And so, considering this is the end of a long day where they have had to
Mhm.
exert themselves fighting Furies, it might just be that they're both looking at that and going, I do not have the energy to do my best to even try to decipher this.
Yeah, my brain can't even parse together what that might mean. I am so
Mhm.
exhausted. Very interesting. Okay. I like
And I
that.
like that this gives a reason for Grover to be there again. Not that you really need a
Yes.
reason for Grover to be there, but I like that he gets to be Percy's liaison, weirdly,
Mhm.
both to the divine world and now also back to the mortal world. It's cool. I think it's a fun detail that Grover always just gets to be the support character friend in a good way. And I
Mhm.
also like that this establishes why Annabeth brought her book, which she lost on the bus, in ancient Greek because she can read ancient Greek without suffering from dyslexia. So that
Yeah,
explains
it's
why she
not
fought the
just because she's a tryhard. That's part of it,
exactly.
but not just because of that.
She actually just wanted to be able to read her book, which fair. You know what? Good
Yes.
for her.
Was it still an awful pick? Should you read anything else besides architecture? Which I don't even know how you'd read about that necessarily. Yeah, she could have done anything else. So she's still being a bit of a tryhard, but we love her.
Indeed. Well, and there's also just more excellent, what I would call subtle foreshadowing. Maybe it's not too subtle, but you have no indication as to why it would be foreshadowing yet.
Mhm.
And so you get a description of some of the cement garden gnomes that are there, and it's described as how they are smiling and waving as if they were about to get their picture taken. Because now, if you've clocked this line, when Medusa is later like, pose for a picture, you're gonna go,
Mhm.
wait a minute,
Wait
I
a
know what
minute.
this means.
Yeah. Well, this is not a necessarily a scary chapter. This is not a horror book at all, but this does read like a horror novel for this
Hmm.
chapter. Like it is a scary story. Again, it's got the beginning, it's these three kids wandering through the woods, they're lost, they're hungry, they find this business. Ooh, they're getting some weird vibes from it. There's some creepy decor. And it follows that arc of they're in a place there one of them's like, "We should get out of here." They're two like, "Oh, come on, it's not a big deal," but they keep seeing these warning signs and these red flags, and they ignore them, ignore them, ignore them until finally, the monster shows up. It's a really fun, contained mini adventure on this much larger quest.
And it keeps the tension throughout the
Yes.
chapter.
Oh
That's
my
what I
god.
liked.
There's a lingering dread.
Yeah. And it works really well. And you mentioned again that it has this setup, this buildup, and we're still in that buildup phase. And every little detail that we do continue with once we're in Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium is driving that tension forward. Grover kind of creepily being like, I don't like this place, guys. It's weird. And Percy and Annabeth are both just one track mind, snack bar. Let's get some
Yep.
food.
We
But
need
then
food. We are hungry.
and I understand hunger is a powerful motivator, but it leads them to fully disregard when Grover says, please, he is pleading with them, don't knock. I smell monsters.
Mhm.
And Percy, all I smell is, or no, that's Annabeth.
Yeah.
All I smell is burgers. Aren't you hungry? Crazy. I can't imagine how hungry Annabeth has to be the not voice of reason of the group.
Yeah. She says, "Your nose is clogged up from the Furies. I'm trying to get some food, so be quiet and fall in line."
We are on a new mission and it is no longer questing. Another just wonderful little joke is as they're discussing, and Annabeth says, aren't you hungry? And he says, I'm a vegetarian. And then Percy says, you eat enchiladas in aluminum cans. And Grover just responds with, those are vegetables.
Those are
Which,
vegetables, period. Come on, period. Let's leave. It's like, I am
dog,
not gonna argue this. There are more important things. He also, again, the most, I would say, important detail is of these creepy statues, Grover points out, he's like, "One of these looks like my Uncle Ferdinand." And it seems like kind of a throwaway, like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I guess it looks like a satyr." But it keeps coming back up. We'll see that later. And again, it's all these ever since you mentioned that Rick used to write mysteries, he was a mystery writer, it's never left my brain. This is just so it's so crystal clear that that's his jam. He's
the
planting all these seeds that will be used not just later in the book, but like later in the very chapter.
I love it. I love that the book is filled with it. And I love that whenever any twist or important thing happens, you immediately flip back 3 pages and go, oh, he told me that was going
Oh
to
shit.
happen.
I remember that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Or
It's
like, how
always
could I
fun.
miss that?
I think for me, that really speaks to how I was able to reread and reread these books over and over again, is because there's so many of these little details that you don't realize the first time are pertinent to what you're reading. But upon reread, you just get to pick up more and more of them. I think that's why this has been a really enjoyable experience to make this podcast for me, is because there's so much that even reading this for what is probably upward of my 20th time. I'm like, oh, that's neat. Oh my gosh, that's new. And that's awesome. That's really, really fun.
It's great. So they, despite all of the protests from Grover, they go and knock on the door, and the person that answers them is this tall Middle Eastern woman. At least that's what Percy thinks. She is wearing a long black gown that covered everything but her hands, her head completely veiled, her eyes glinting behind a curtain of black gauze, but that's all that he could make out. So she is wearing I believe it's a burqa, is the full body and eye obscuring garment. But this is the part that I really enjoy. It says her coffee colored hands looked old but well manicured and elegant. So I imagine she was a grandmother who had once been a beautiful lady, which is another one of those descriptors of like, why I wish I thought of things like that. I wish I thought of things that way because I know exactly the image he's going for now.
Yes.
The
I
feeling,
triple
the vibe.
underlined the had to.
Yes.
Like, it is sorry, not to cut you off. It is so well done. And again, there's just these little hints in there that you can start to pick up on who she actually is, even just because of that single line of who had once been a beautiful lady. So well done. Sorry, please continue.
Oh, you're good. You just cut me off right as I was about to say. We also learned something about Percy. He's got no love for the gilfs. He's like, she's old. Ew. Which, come on, Percy. Old ladies deserve some love too. I'm sure she's still beautiful, right?
Oh my.
Not playing
Yeah,
off
we're gonna
that
find
one, huh,
out.
Connor? Not gonna, not gonna roll with that bit.
I am not gonna roll with the gilts.
You and Percy, man. You and Percy. Not rolling with the gilfs. Shaking my head right now.
What can I say? I'm a married man.
All right.
You've
Valid
got room to
excuse.
explore. I'm taken.
I just think that there's beauty everywhere, man. And I think
I'll
everybody
give you
deserves
that.
to be considered beautiful. Come
I
on.
will say that if beauty is everywhere, it might not be under that veil. I gotta tell
We
you.
don't know that yet. We don't know that yet.
We don't know
We
that
just
yet.
know she's vaguely Middle Eastern. She's saying, "Oh, children, you can't be out here. Where are your parents?" And we get a just phenomenal bit of deception from Percy. Annabeth trying to think of, okay, what could be a good lie? What's a story we could say? And as she's stumbling over and formulating this plan in her head, Percy just shoves her out the way, says, "We're orphans."
You know,
The old woman goes, "Orphans? But you're surely that's not true." He says, "Yeah, we got separated from our caravan, our circus caravan. The ringmaster told us to meet him at the gas station if we got lost, but he may have forgotten. Or maybe he meant a different gas station." And then Percy just totally bails. "Anyway, we're lost. Is that food I smell?"
one track mind. He is still right there, goal oriented. What I am concerned with is the smell of that cheeseburger. Give it here.
I really like to think he is not selling this lie. Like, he's whipping that out because he's a psycho. We've covered this before. He's a psychopath and a sociopath, so he can just, lie pathologically. But I like to imagine he's not trying to ham up like, "We're lost orphans. Oh no, our circus left us." He's just like, "These are some facts. Believe them or not. I'm hungry. I want to be fed imminently."
What do I need to tell you to get food in my belly?
Mhm.
And of course, Medusa being Medusa actually is like, yeah, of course, I totally believe that very good lie. And she ushers them inside, and Annabeth is just, circus caravan? And Percy, always have a strategy, right?
Always
Your
have
head
a
is full of
strategy.
kelp.
I like you read that like Percy was kind of meek about it. I don't know. I read that as he's like tapping the side of his forehead. He's proud of it. He's like, "You always got to have a strategy, right?"
Oh, that is how I imagine it. I apologize if I did not convey it that way. It was trying to do the under the breath, but I think you're totally right. He's the meme of the guy tapping his forehead being like, "I get it.
Oh,
I
he
know."
knows. Uh-huh.
Annabeth says, "Yeah, I know your head is full of seaweed."
Yeah. Unfortunately, Annabeth, you did get fucking wrecked. So Percy is currently 1-0 right now, potentially 2-0 if we want to count the competition is starting when she had to apologize to him earlier in the chapter.
Oof.
But now we're in the warehouse. And this is where we get some more solid foreshadowing. We see that these statues, they're in all different poses, wearing all sorts of different outfits with different expressions on their faces. Percy's starting to be like, "This is a little odd." You know, you'd have to have a pretty huge garden to fit even one of those statues because they're all life size. But mostly I was thinking about food. His stomach is obfuscating his already very low level of critical thinking.
Yep.
I appreciate that he outright says, "Go ahead, call me an idiot for walking into a strange lady's shop like that just because I was hungry. But I do impulsive stuff sometimes. Plus, you've never smelled Auntie M's burgers. The aroma was like laughing gas in a dentist chair. It made everything else go away." So what Rick does here is says, "Yeah, no, they're falling for like if this were a movie, you'd be screaming at the screen like, 'Don't go in there, you dumbasses. What are you doing?'" But there's some reason behind it. One, they're very hungry, but two, there is something like supernatural about how good this food smells. And I appreciate that the book doesn't lampshade their impulsiveness, doesn't say, "Hey, look at that. Isn't that stupid?" Anyways, it gives some reason to it. It gives some rationale to it. So you don't totally lose faith in the ability of the group. There is something else happening here.
Yeah. I honestly, I really enjoy it as an explanation of, yeah, he's 12 and he's hungry. You expect him to think after that? Like, it's just not going to happen. And
Mhm.
it all plays into, again, this idea of a horror kind of genre twist for this chapter
Yeah.
where you are sitting there going, come on, come on, come on, don't do it. Don't go in there. You know better. And they give you their reason. They say, we're going in there anyway. Tough, sucks. And then you don't even, or rather, they mentioned that they did not even notice that Auntie M had locked the door behind them, which is just another like classic. You can see the horror movie over the shoulder. The suspicious character locks the door in the background, and all of your main characters are happily looking forward, like, wow, nice place you got here.
Oh, yeah. I can picture it perfectly in my head. The lock is out of focus when you see the kids, and then it goes in focus as it turns to, like, close. Yeah. But all
It
Percy gives a shit about is finding this dining area. And finds it he does. There's a grill, there's a soda fountain, there's a pretzel heater, and a nacho cheese dispenser. Everything you could want. And there's even places to sit and eat. Connor, it's almost like Auntie M loves having people over to eat and is willing and happy to facilitate a good meal for, again, travelers on an empty road where there's nothing around them who probably haven't eaten in a while.
not suspicious at all. And I'm
No,
sure
not at
it's
all.
entirely reasonable and there's no gimmick, no catch.
She is a kind businesswoman just trying to make a buck and help people as they're on their road trips.
She's even turning on a fresh deep fryer to get those fries hot and ready. I'm
Mhm.
sure that's what that hissing noise is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's funny though because Grover's like, "Hey, we don't have any money." He doesn't like this. He's trying to get out of it. But Auntie M says, "No, no, children, no money. This is a special case. It is my treat, for such nice orphans." And Annabeth thanks her very politely. "Thank you, ma'am." And Percy notices that Auntie M stiffens at that, as though Annabeth had done something or said something wrong, and then relaxes. And Percy says, I must have just imagined that. Probably just my hunger playing tricks on me." And Auntie M says, "Oh, it's quite all right, Annabeth." And then says something about her gray eyes. But Connor, I underlined quite all right, Annabeth, because I
Mhm.
noticed, wait a minute, hold on, hold the phone. Annabeth never said her name. And then Rick said, "You don't get to feel proud about that because I'm going to mention that literally in the next sentence."
That one did feel like the first time where the book went, and I understand that this is written for children, so your attention span is short. Let me make this very clear for you. She is not supposed to know that. And I
Yes.
do think that over this page and the next page, with the hissing and the not even taking off the headdress to cook, Now the stakes are ramping up, and Rick is like, okay, the monster is in the room. Are you aware that the monster is in the room? Have you put it together yet? Do I need to beat you over the head with it?
Yeah, and I mean, it is becoming apparent to us, the readers, and apparent to Grover as well. But the way that Percy is eating, Percy and Annabeth, they're slurping down milkshakes and eating trays of double cheeseburgers and extra, extra large servings of fries, and they are just gorging themselves. So I totally get it. They are locked in on this, what I would have to assume is delicious food. And I wouldn't notice if there was a monster next to me too. You ever just go and get like Five Guys? It's like, you know what, Five Guys, I
Oh,
know it's
yeah.
gonna cost me like a second mortgage, but I want some. I'm craving some. And then it's just you go into like a hypnotic trance because you got to enjoy it. It's just so good. Your brain starts lighting up like a Christmas tree. That's what's happening with them right now. Tenfold. So I understand.
Props to Percy for maintaining some decorum and manners. Sally taught him well. He realizes that he should probably say something, and so he hits her with the, so you sell gnomes.
That's right. Yes, he tries some small talk, goes with a decent opener. For what it's worth, doing better than Grover, who mentions, "Hey, is that hissing?" To which, Auntie M says, "Oh, it's probably the deep fryer. You have keen ears, Grover." And Grover, not quite as smooth as Percy, although again, Percy I don't think was being super smooth to begin with, says, "Well, yeah, I take vitamins for my ears." And I love her response, which is just, "That's admirable. Please relax." Like, she knows that he knows something's up and is like, "You are not who I care about right now, kid. All right, little satyr. You just go sit over there. I know you know something's up. You're not going to do anything about it, though."
She says, I have got these little demigods hook, line, and sinker.
Oh, in the palm of my hand. And Percy, yes, is trying to be polite, and Auntie M actually rather talkative. She doesn't just sell gnomes, she sells animals and people. Anything for the garden, custom orders, statuary, very popular. And Percy says, "Hey, you get a whole lot of business out here? There's like nothing else." Auntie M's, business a little tough. That highway was built, and most cars, they don't really come this way anymore. So she's really got to cherish everybody that comes inside. And this is where Percy, the fog kind of lifts from his eyes for a brief moment, and it's that spidey sense again.
Mm-hmm.
His neck tingles, he feels like somebody else is watching him. And this actually is a bit creepy. He says, "I turned, but it was just a statue of a young girl holding an Easter basket. The detail was incredible, much better than you see in most garden statues. But something was wrong with her face. It looked as if she were startled or even terrified." There's some solid, like, dread. This is where the dread
Very well
starts
done.
coming in. It's not
Yeah.
just ominous, there is something wrong. Wrong here.
Palpably so. And the explanation of the face is the hardest to get right is
Yeah.
just more good double entendre of she's
Mhm.
serious, but also for a sculptor?
Yeah.
How did you try and go for a smile and you got that?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, she says,
concerning.
"You notice some of my creations do not turn out well. They are marred. They do not sell. The face is the hardest to get right. Always the face." It makes your skin crawl.
Good.
It it gets really creepy, like, out of nowhere, and again, there's already been some, like, foreshadowing and stuff planted, like, something's wrong, but we haven't had, like, a fear factor like this before. There have been moments of, like, terror, there is imminent mortal danger, but this is where it just strings you along. Super, super well done.
And I find it so ridiculous that this is the detail that finally gets Annabeth on board, and she's like, I get it. I know who you are. She says, once upon a time, I had two sisters to help me in the business, but they have passed on. Annabeth stopped eating. She sat forward. Two sisters? Like, really, Annabeth? That's the detail you remember? That Medusa had two sisters? You didn't walk around,
Uh-huh.
see a bunch of stone statues and a woman covering her face? Sure, man. Two sisters.
The
That's what got you.
machinations of her mind are beyond me, Connor.
I will say, I think that's a change that really worked for this episode when they did it in the show, was having them very instantly realize that that was Medusa, as opposed to kind of dragging along like they do here. But
Mhm.
neither here nor there, because now Auntie M can really go to town and describe her backstory, what got her here. And Annabeth can just be more and more uncomfortable with every word, while Percy is lulled by her words magically, it seems, because neither Grover nor Annabeth are affected. So apparently, whatever innate part of Percy that is divine from Poseidon causes him to also be susceptible to wooing from Medusa. I found that to be a weird.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
It's
it's
the
a
genetic
real
rizzing?
weird
That's
detail.
awful.
Mhm. It's uncomfortable. I'm pretty sure what's happening here is she is using, like, a magical connection to the lust that Poseidon had for her to seduce a 12-year-old. Which, like, she's a
Think
monster, so I guess she's allowed to be
Yeah.
evil, but
I think I didn't necessarily read it as that. That's definitely a read of it. I don't think it's incorrect. I read it more of just she's being gentler to Percy, and Percy does have an innate sympathy towards her. And he said in a couple other lines, the sadness in her voice sounded so deep and so real that I couldn't help feeling sorry for her. I
I
think
think
it's more of just an empathy, a feeling of, I don't know, maybe a latent guilt or a desire to understand. I don't know, but I feel like it's a bit more pure than the seduce kind of lust aspect of it. At least that's how I read it.
I actually agree. I don't think that there's anything in here that actually reads as seduction. I was just trying to get a rise out of
But
people.
it's that transitive. Yes, there is that obvious connection, Poseidon, Medusa, and she has a soft spot for Percy because of that. Absolutely.
Exactly. Exactly. But it is all right because Annabeth has now figured it out. She's like, "We gotta
Mhm.
go.
We should
The
go.
ringmaster will be waiting."
Mhm.
Grover,
You
of
sounded
course,
10.
is finally he's on board with the food train now. He's like, "Wait, hold on, my wax paper. We just got to the good part, guys. You finished off the basket of fries so I could eat the actual food here."
That's right. Yep. Annabeth had a window where Grover would have been super willing to help and get the fuck out of there, and she lost it. The minute
Yep.
there was inedible food,
Some
or
delicious
inedible, I guess,
greasy wax
materials.
paper.
That's right. He's like, "Well, shit, I mean, I better dig in too. If we're all belly up."
And now tying it back to that earlier moment where it's commented that the gnomes look like they're posing for a photo, she says, "Before you go, won't you at least sit for a pose?" "A pose?" Annabeth asked warily. "A photograph. I will use it to model a new statue." "Uh-huh. That's what you're gonna do to get the new statue."
Mhm.
"Of course." And Annabeth,
Yeah.
uncomfortable, is like, I don't have a way to get out of here, so I guess." And Percy's like, "Of course we could take a photo for you." And this whole page, there is not much to say about it other than, at least from my perspective, that it was great. This is
Mhm.
the climactic moment of the horror thing where the monster is creeping around the corner and you just see the
Oh,
talons
you
for
can
a moment.
hear the violin just, like, getting even more shrill and
Yeah.
shrill. Yeah.
And so, not much light for a photo. "Oh, enough for us to see each other. Where's your camera?" Completely ignored. "Can
Mhm.
you smile for me, everyone? Please, a large smile?" And it's just like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden Grover's like, "That sure does look like Uncle Ferdinand."
I know. I love then there's, like, 2 or 3 different conversations, like, happening at the same time
Mhm.
too.
There's so much
Percy is
going on.
Yeah. It's like Percy's dealing with Auntie M and getting kinda pissed at Annabeth. Annabeth is pleading for Percy to be like, "Something is this is bad. We need to fucking go." And Grover is fixated on this statue that looks like his uncle until finally it crescendos. We've reached the climax. Auntie M is peeling her veil back. Annabeth finally says, Percy, something's wrong. And Grover gasps, that is Uncle Ferdinand! Annabeth shouts, look away! She whips on her Yankees cap. She vanishes into thin air. She pushes over Grover and Percy, so they're not looking at her. And we're fucking off. All right, we just had our monster jump scare. Now we're in the action. The monster is loose. There is proper danger. We're in it. And I love how this entire chapter, again, because this is all through Percy's perspective, he can't see a lot. So it's just all through what he hears and what he thinks is happening for this. It's very, very cool. And he does it, he being Rick, does it in such a way that you're never confused as to what is going on, even though, again, Percy is really only using his hearing for this next page. He knows that Grover is scrambling. He activates the shoes that let him fly. Annabeth is off somewhere else screaming, don't look! And Percy is now realizing, oh shit, I'm like not all mentally there right now. I feel groggy. Like again, he was put in the dentist chair and given some of that good happy gas.
You comment on the fact that Rick in particular is using a lot of the auditory cues. I made specific note of that as well. The writing through here is impeccable for description. I think it's a masterclass in giving yourself a weird scenario, writing yourself kind of into a corner. What do you describe when your character can't see? And then it just nails it. One of the things that really stuck out to me in particular was the modulation in Medusa's voice, but also completely separately, the buzzing of the shoes like hummingbirds.
Yeah.
Just two completely different, but both striking auditory cues that give you all of the context you need. The changing and modulation of Medusa's voice is her, you can now see the manipulative side of her front and center, clear as day. And
Mm-hmm.
you get to the understanding that Grover is there. He's helping out. It's all just impeccable. I am going to pull us aside for a brief aside. I'm going to call this a gray-eyed aside because Medusa does refer to Athena as the gray-eyed one, which I just thought you might like to know. That is actually an epithet of Athena's. It appears almost exclusively in the work of Homer, but Homer refers to her across the Iliad and the Odyssey very frequently as not the gray-eyed one, but rather as the word he uses is glaukopus. That's her epithet, and it usually translates to bright-eyed or with gleaming eyes, but later throughout history, the word will then change to mean bluish-green or gray, making her epithet gray-eyed, which is perhaps how Rick got to the children of Athena having gray eyes. Aside over, I
Mm.
apologize.
No, that's really cool. I appreciate that. I was wondering, because it's a cool title, the Gray-Eyed One. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
fan of a good moniker. You know
You can
this.
thank Homer for that.
Thanks, Homer.
Got a lot to thank Homer for.
So this is where we're off to the races. Action starting. Percy has to get into hero mode, and the book does something that's very, very clever, where obviously Percy doesn't have a polished shield or a mirror to look off of. He had no idea he was going to be facing Medusa. So Rick has Percy view Medusa through those glass spheres, the gazing balls that people put in their gardens. You all know what we're talking about. They're different colors. I don't really know what they're supposed to be outside of just, I guess, decoration. And he uses those throughout this statue garden, and it makes perfect sense. It's like, of course those are there. Absolutely. So not only is that very clever for Rick to think about, but also really, really smart for Percy. I don't know that I would be quick-witted enough to do that personally.
Yeah. Well,
Now, if I had my iPod Touch, I'd definitely be able to fight Medusa. I wonder, what do you think it would be like if he had an iPod Touch, Connor?
I'm so glad that we don't have to know because Rick has cleverly written phones out of this piece of literature. It just has such a great impact. I even wrote that this is a a wonderful example of a scenario where having a device like an iPod Touch would invalidate a lot of the drama of the situation and the cleverness of the characters. So I'm just glad we don't have to think about that.
That's a really good point, Connor. Let's continue.
Speaking of continuing, you mentioned that it was clever of Percy. I must give credit where credit is due. It is Annabeth who grabs
Oh,
the
shit.
green gazing ball and hands it to Percy, specifically saying a polished shield would be better because that's what Perseus, his namesake, kills Medusa using a polished shield. And an additional detail from that section that I just thought was really interesting is you don't often get a moment where Annabeth is properly scared of a monster. Usually she's gung ho, I can take it all myself, I'm smarter. But here it's you have to cut her head off. What? Are
Mhm.
you crazy? Let's get out of here. Medusa is a menace. She's evil. I'd kill her myself, but. And then she stumbles, swallows. But you've got the better weapon. And that is, I would say, very clearly not the truth because Annabeth is rightfully terrified of Medusa. Medusa has probably been out for revenge. I would even imagine that kind of similar to Mark of Athena, where you have all of these children of Athena that go and die to this same monster over and over and over as Arachne takes many of Athena's children. Medusa's probably out there being the death and end of a fair number of Athena's children as well.
Oh, absolutely. How many of those travelers do you think were children of Athena? It's
Oh, too
probably
many.
non-zero.
Yeah,
Percy, I just read, Percy was the one to notice the gazing balls first. Annabeth just handed him one and was like, "Hey, you can."
I see.
But he did come to the conclusion first that he could view Medusa through those. So I'm going to give a point to Annabeth for weaponizing it, but I have to rectify. I was not incorrect, and my pride stays intact.
I see. We
Second,
were both correct. I'll
we were both
accept.
correct. As Percy is in runaway survival mode and Medusa is calling after him and Percy is like mentally fighting this urge to look at her. She says a couple of things that stick out. One is, "You see why I must destroy the girl, Percy. She is my enemy's daughter. I shall crush her statue to dust. But you, dear Percy, you need not suffer." And then she continues as he's trying to like fight off her advances. Says, "Do you really want to help the gods? Do you understand what awaits you on this foolish quest, Percy? What will happen if you reach the underworld? Do not be a pawn of the Olympians, my dear. You would be better off as a statue. Less pain, less pain." And it's that one, we talked about this a little bit earlier. There is a softness that she has, an affinity towards Percy by sake of her still being head over heels for Poseidon. But the last two sentences, just less pain, less pain. It reminded me of Mr. D's comment. He's
Yeah, I
like,
was I
I
actually
could,
was about to say, I like that you caught that and pointed it out
yes.
because this is the second time someone has told Percy, and two people on very different sides of the equation that have told
Hmm.
him, "You would probably be better off not being a part of this game.
Yes.
I can make your life better."
Oh yeah, two people on opposite ends of the spectrum, but both care about Percy, and you could compare and contrast them even more. Mr. D acts like he doesn't give a shit about Percy, but is a god, so he's quote, one of the good guys. Whereas Medusa does, makes it very vocal. She does care about Percy, but she's a monster. It's a really cool parallel.
It's very well done. No, I also noted that sentence as well. It's just a very interesting comparison to make, and I think it does speak to how many people can just see that the gods suck. And
Yes.
it doesn't matter which side you're on, whether you're a god among the rest of the Olympians or a monster who herself has felt the wrath of the gods going,
Hmm.
you don't want to do this. And honestly, to their point, Percy will spend the rest of his childhood from this point forward on quest after quest for the
Oh,
gods, often
suffering.
doing shit they could do for themselves. He,
Hmm.
they are right. He might suffer less as a statue or a dolphin.
Yes, some of the most I would think, painless ways to go out. Percy is already kind of sleepy. He's got a full belly. He just turns to stone. You don't hurt when you turn to stone. You just don't feel anything. Getting atomized, literally, it would be impossible to feel a thing. That is a mercy that is being offered to him. But he says no. Well, I guess technically he doesn't have time to say no because Grover goes full fucking Terminator. He comes flying in overhead with a branch and just starts beating the shit out of Medusa. And Percy's surprised. He's like, I would think that he's going to fly overhead and just totally miss her and like biff it, like fall into a statue and be out of commission. But no, he hits Medusa like 3 times. He's, for the Walking Dead fans out there, he's like Negan, just bashing her skull in. And he's pissed. He's saying that was for Uncle Ferdinand. He's so mad. So now we know Grover's got some bloodlust. You don't fuck with Grover.
I really enjoyed all of that because it does feel like we were just waiting for Grover to be in his element. Give this man a piece of nature and a cause, and he will shine forth with righteous fury.
Yeah. Well, I guess in that case, he's not Terminator. He's Rambo. He's
Yeah.
full on Rambo. Yeah. But now, Annabeth gives Percy one of these gazing balls, says, listen, she makes an excuse, a valid excuse. You've got the better weapon and you got a chance. So you got to kill this lady, which Percy is kind of reluctant of at first, more so in disbelief. You know, he is still, all things considered, has not been in the world of demigods all that long. And of the people he's fought, it was Electo, who he killed kind of on a whim. He didn't really know what he was doing. It was just a reflex. The Minotaur, which again, that was more just kind of reflex. Knew what he was doing, kind of, but it was super, super unrefined. And then he ran away from the Furies, all 3 of them. So he hasn't had a whole lot of, human to monster combat. And Annabeth does something that I think really speaks to Percy as a character, which is speaking to his humanity. And she says, look, do you want her turning more innocent people into statues? And she points to a pair of statue lovers, a man and a woman with their arms around each other, turned to stone by the monster. And from that, Percy's like, all right, we're in it. And Annabeth brings out the gazing ball and says, the convexity will cause some distortion, the reflection size, and blah, 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 blah. Percy does the classic English 4 eyes. Like, what the fuck are you saying to me right now? She says,
I
just look in the ball. Look in the ball.
I did clock that as a rare occurrence where Rick dumps some generic nerd speak, in air
Mm-hmm.
quotes, onto a character, and it's like, I get that you would probably map that onto Annabeth, but she normally feels so much more, if this were D&D characters, like a wisdom character, surprise, surprise, who would know that that's a terrible way to phrase something to someone,
Yeah,
especially in such a
maybe don't be
situation.
so ostentatious. Like, use
If I have
simple words.
Yeah, exactly. If I have one criticism for this entire chapter, it's that, frankly, that line just felt unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
That's it. That's my one thing from this chapter that I came away and I was like, could have done without it.
Yeah. But it made for some fun banter. She says that stuff that makes no sense to Percy. He says, would you speak English? And she just goes, I am! Which could be read as this is how she thinks of things to herself. And in this moment of panic, that's just its flow of thought. She is not censoring and editing to benefit Percy. She's just saying exactly what's in her brain at this very moment because there is no time to explain.
I do like that as an explanation. I think that you are correct to identify that as probably the reason for why it exists. And like I said, small criticism. If that's my only criticism for the
Mhm.
chapter, then we're doing great.
As they're talking about this, formulating this game plan, Grover, the hero, says, hey guys, I think she's unconscious. And then we just hear, roar! He goes, maybe not. And then keeps going in. He doesn't stop. He doesn't run away. He's like,
He's
you're not
committed.
down yet.
No, Grover,
Uncle
he's
Ferdinand is
coming
giving
into his
him
hero
strength.
arc.
He is. That's right. He's gonna put that on his LinkedIn. Seeker,
Yes.
hero.
Seeker, hero, basher of Medusa skulls.
That's right, exactly. That's one of his skills.
And with that, as Grover goes back in for more, Percy is heading in as well. Unfortunately, at this point, Grover does not manage to get the drop on Medusa. She grabs the bat, swings him, pulling him off course, sending him tumbling through the air because he's still flying with the sneakers. And so now it's all on Percy. He's got a giant glass green ball in one hand, his sword in the other. And I felt like it really amps up and again leans into that like monster of the week tension
Mhm.
where Percy, don't listen to her. Too late, she cackles. And then she lunges at him, talons raised. And there's a split second where it's like, "Huh, did she get him? Did she not?" And whink, he lops off her head. And his first reaction, rightfully so, to be honest, is it took all my willpower not to look.
Mhm.
Because I get it. But he did get to see a distortion of her
You
face
get it,
in.
Connor? You get it? You're cutting off people's heads and you wanna look?
No, I'm not cutting off people's heads, but it's like looking at a train wreck. You can't turn away.
Mhm. Yeah, good save, buddy.
Hey, man, you can
I'm
think what you
keeping
want
my eyes
to
on you.
think. But what I found particularly interesting just before this is that he mentions that surely her face wasn't really that ugly. The green swirls of the gazing ball must be distorting it, making it worse. But actually, the implication of the actual lore within the universe and mythologically must be that the reflection actually makes it look better because she turns people to stone because of how hideous she is.
Mhm.
Like, it's also a magic power, sure, but the implication is that nope, the green swirls of the gazing ball do not make it worse. They actually make it better. Whatever you're seeing, it's uglier in person.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. There's some real nasty details that I did not realize are traditional to Medusa.
Sounds like we've got a good juicy myth section coming up.
Indeed. And actually, I think that, spoiler alert, she should have been able to fight Grover better. But I'm glad she didn't because I like Grover getting to be a hero.
I like Grover being a badass.
Indeed. Oh, hey, man. Me too. And now the tension is relieved, the head is cut
Yes.
off. People are very careful not to look down at the ground despite the
Mhm.
sopping ooze in their socks, which is notable because it's the first time that a monster has left behind viscera, and it
Yeah,
is.
that's true. I didn't
Mhm.
even pick that up. I figured I was more focused on how the head stayed behind. And internally, God, this book, it knows me. Maybe because I am, again, mentally a 12-year-old. But I was like, wait, how did the head stay behind? I
Yep,
don't get
and we
that.
immediately get an answer from Annabeth as she explains that once it's severed, it becomes a spoil of war, which
Hmm.
makes sense to some extent if you're looking at it from the perspective of in the mythology, whenever someone cuts off Medusa's head, they get to keep it. So
Yeah.
we have to have a reason in the book that they can keep it because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. And I'm okay with this. I think it's a little like serving the narrative, but why not have a system for creating cool magic items in your world? We already established something similar to this with the Minotaur horn, which is just
Hmm.
another lovely example of Riordan being like, see that thing that was totally unnecessary and innocuous? Now it makes sense. Now it's relevant.
Yeah.
And we just buy right into it. We're like, oh, of course, if Percy gets to keep the Minotaur horn, he gets to keep the Medusa head.
He gets to keep Medusa's head. That's right.
Well written. Very well written.
Yes. I agree. I do think if that Minotaur horn didn't exist, we would be complaining about this.
We might, honestly, but it does. And hey, fair enough. You beat us to the punch, Rick.
Yeah, you got us. You got us this time, Rick.
And I find it fun that Annabeth is like, don't unwrap it. It could still petrify you. Which, if Percy had studied for his test all the way back in chapter 2, he would know that because Polydictes was on his test. Just saying.
Yeah, you tell him, Connor.
Yeah. Yeah, should have studied better, Percy, and then
Should have
Annabeth wouldn't have
studied
to
better.
explain it to you.
That's
Um,
right. And the
but
audience.
Then that's, of course, followed up with Grover and Percy having a genuine, like, fun moment
They have a
where
bro moment.
they do. They have a total bro moment where Percy is there like, "The Red Baron, good job, man." And Grover can't think of anything to say. "That was really not fun." Well, the hitting her with a stick part, that was fun. Which is just
Yeah,
more
but
good
crashing into that
comedy.
concrete bear, not fun.
Yeah, I believe that. So they wrap up the head, and then Annabeth explains a version of the myth, notably not
A very PG version of the myth.
a very PG version. Again, we'll talk more in depth as to where the different pieces get pulled from and why I think this is an interesting interpretation. But for now, this is the PJO lore version of the
Yes.
story. Medusa was Poseidon's girlfriend. They decide to meet in Athena's temple. Athena is not so happy about it. Medusa and her two sisters that helped her get into the temple all get turned into monsters. There you go. The
There
end,
you
short
go.
version of the story.
Yeah. And Annabeth notes, what we've already talked about, which is Medusa is still sweet on Poseidon. And Percy probably reminded her of him, which
Mhm.
is, we've talked about how the mortal lovers of gods, suffer horribly, right? Medusa's a perfect example of that. But how
Yeah.
some of them still, even after being scorned or hurt because of them, are so like rapturously in love with their godly partners. And it once again raises the question, how good was the dick? It couldn't have been that good, Medusa. It was thousands of years ago, and now you're a monster, a horrid monster. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think Poseidon's ever visited.
Jack, you know what that means? It means the dick must have been divine.
Godly. Oh, that too. That too. We went two different routes, very close though.
Very close indeed. We learn what I think immediately after this is perhaps one of the more niche, but pretty, like, up there superpowers that Grover apparently has, which is that satyrs don't get migraines. Does this imply
Yeah.
that satyrs do not get headaches at all? If they don't,
I
I'm
mean,
here for it. Good for them. They deserve something.
yeah. I'm gonna give them they just don't get headaches, period. Because they deal with a lot. And I think if they were capable of getting headaches, there would be a lot of satyrs that refuse service to camp and being a seeker.
You know, immunity to headaches would probably be a very important superpower if you have to exist in middle schools across America.
Yeah. And, deal with death all the time.
That too. That too for sure.
But mainly middle school.
What's the difference, honestly?
Heyo.
But we get another reference that Percy is pissed at the gods, rightfully so. He was
Mhm.
angry with all the gods for this whole quest, for getting us blown off the road, and in two major fights the very first day out from camp. And with that, he storms inside. He makes a rash decision. He sends the head off to Olympus, Hermes Express, overnight. And another
Yeah.
detail that I caught through here is that he specifically gets the address to Hades and Persephone's palace and the underworld, which is important for plot reasons. Of course, they have to get there. And so this is a good establishing detail of now they know where they're going. But also another good red herring pointing you towards Hades and implying that, yeah, Hades is a villain. He buys stuff from Medusa. You shouldn't
Yep.
trust him. And it's all just more layering. It's more
Yes.
Rick layering item on top of item that all comes cohesive together in this novel. And again, is just so well done. I cannot praise it enough.
100%. Yeah. I love, as Percy sends this, he's just such a sassy little guy. He gives the address, it's a severed head, and just writes, "With best wishes, Percy Jackson." And I have nothing more to add outside of, if I didn't already enjoy Percy, that would have hooked me. Be like, "All right, I'm team Percy now. That's badass. That's rad."
Especially when you get to, they're going to think you're impertinent. I am
I am.
impertinent.
So good. It's such a good line.
And
Oh.
Annabeth, resigned to Percy's dumb fuckery, is just like, all right, we need a new plan.
Mm-hmm.
Because Athena always, always has
Always,
a
always has a
plan.
plan. Oh, Connor. Oh, this chapter was so good.
It was really enjoyable. Before we sit down for some myths, do you wanna go over? You seem like you've got thoughts.
I
Recap.
Yes. I think, and I stand by what I said at the beginning of this episode. If somebody has never read Percy Jackson before, and you have to give them a chapter that isn't just like giving them the book, you could give them this chapter, chapter 11, tell them it's just a short story, and they will want more. This has literally everything. This is the most condensed, concise version of what Percy Jackson is, and it does it so beautifully. You have awesome character interactions between the main group. You've got a really interesting setting where people have to use their environment both for and against them. You get a very famous and scary monster that they have to try and outsmart before they can just outmuscle it. You have really cool weaving of actual mythology with the quest that they're currently on. And it's all done with Rick just in his bag
Oh,
with
on his
the
A game.
jokes and, setting up all these different, foreshadowing and surprises and letting the reader, again, understanding that this is like middle grade fiction, let the reader feel smart. Let the reader intuit what's happening. And at any point in time, let's say that you had a soul read. You read Auntie M's Emporium and saw the statues and said, oh, it's Medusa. There is always a character that you know is on board with you, whether they know it's specifically Medusa or not. You're never stuck with like, wow, all of these people are being dumbasses, and it makes me, as the person reading this, feel frustrated. No, Grover was on edge the entire time, and because of that, it creates a sense of urgency that doesn't necessarily stem from the group just stumbling around aimlessly. There is a purpose to everything that is shown and heard, and it is only to the benefit of the reader, not only for, again, solving this little mini mystery, but also making you respect, appreciate, and come to love these characters even more.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I could repeat everything you just said, but you are so right. It's just such a phenomenal chapter from all angles. And I think that's what really makes this one stand out is it is so consistent. The quality across the board on this chapter is A plus the entire time. You
Yeah,
might have
I mean,
convinced me
Connor,
that this is the best one. You like I it
I'm
was tight, but you might have convinced me.
yeah, I am I nitpick. I hate that I do, but I do. I feel like every chapter I've got something to bitch and moan about, whether warranted or otherwise. I really didn't have any this chapter.
Yeah, the one nitpick I brought up and you said, "Well, that could be explained." I think that speaks to the cohesiveness and the quality of it on the whole.
Mhm.
And also, if you're starting your fantasy book series based on Greek mythology, you gotta have Medusa.
You
Like, can we
gotta.
talk about the Medusa of the whole and we're gonna, like, talk about the Medusa of the whole thing. But when you just think of that, your main character is named Perseus, you had to have it, and here it is literally smack dab in the middle of the book.
Mhm.
So, you worked up to it, you put it at the perfect place for it to be a true threat for our characters, a big challenge. It's not overshadowed by the underworld and some of the other stuff we're gonna get to later. This is a big moment, and it is executed so well, and I think that's important, because I think if you mess up Medusa, the book on the whole does not land as well. This
Mhm.
is a modern retelling of the myth of Perseus, and when you incorporate this, it is so much more cohesive. I think 1,000 years from now, people will pick up this book and they will go, "Oh, see, it might make reference to the old stories, But this is at its core just another retelling of the myth of Perseus, which is so cool because the history goes back far further than you would expect.
I
I
agree.
rant over. It's fantastic. But unless there is more that you would like to discuss regarding the chapter, it may be time to take a seat on one of these stone benches amidst these creepy ass statues here in Auntie M's Garden Emporium and learn a little bit more about Auntie M Medusa herself.
Let's do it.
So, I like to start with depictions. The physical appearance of how these creatures are supposed to look in mythology. And Medusa is pretty well agreed upon in the ancient world. Her description is 4 letters UGLY, ugly. Okay? She has the iconic snakes for hair. She has the tusks of a boar on her face, which is a detail that, to me, I had no idea that that was part of her usual thing. And wings, golden wings.
I only knew her for the snakes for the hair.
I know, the wings and the tusks are what got me. She also sometimes has a beard, but that seems to be up to artist discretion.
Okay.
It's not as prevalent throughout literature, but in a lot of the old, like, ancient Greek pottery that we have that depicts Medusa, honestly, Medusa's on so much shit. There's a term for it that we will kind of get more in depth to, but it is Gorgonean. But it is the practice of using a really ugly face, specifically that of a Gorgon, to instill fear upon others in battle. But also, it ends up, generally speaking, just being used as a protective piece of imagery, a protective piece of iconography, in the idea that bad spirits and other things will be scared away by how ugly Medusa is, or Gorgons in
Damn.
general. Yeah. Which, just to give you the example, Athena's Aegis shield is, of course, adorned with the head of a Gorgon, and in some versions of the myth, it is Medusa's head that, after cutting it off, Perseus gives back to her as a thanks for her help on his quest. And she pops it on the shield that she gave him and turns its shiny reflective surface into the Aegis marred with the Gorgon's face. But other people also use this. In the Iliad, Agamemnon's shield is also described as having a Gorgon's head on it, because that's just what it's for. It is to strike fear in your opponents when it's on a shield, and it, I'm sure, works.
Yeah. Imagine being Athena and making this monster and being like, yeah, scary as shit, right? You should start putting this on your shields.
Well, in some versions, she does not create the monster. In fact,
Ooh.
in most of the original versions, Athena has nothing to do with it. Nothing at all. In the earliest literary references that I could find, we have, where we have been so many times before, Hesiod's Theogony, written again sometime around the 8th or 7th century BC, and that lists the Gorgons by name as being the children of Phorcys and Keto, or Phorcus and Keto, depending on which period of history you're in and if that's a soft C or a hard K. But we know very specifically that in most versions, they are the children, the Gorgons are the children of Phorcys and Keto. And that's pretty well established. There are a few other versions that will deviate from that, but they come much later. So almost all of the early versions of the myth agree. Phorcys, Keto, they have children, a variety of them. They're called the Phorcides, but 3 of them are the Gorgons, and they each are, as I said, listed by name. There is Stheno, Uriel, and finally Medusa. And the Theogony also very specifically mentions that Medusa's fate is a sad one, because she is the only mortal Gorgon. Her sisters are both immortal and ageless, but Medusa is, by proxy of being born, the unfortunate odd man out who is damned to be mortal. The Theogony does also mention her relationship with Poseidon, very briefly. All it says is that Poseidon, he of the dark hair, lay with one of these in a soft meadow among spring flowers. And that's it. That is the whole relationship, according to the earliest literary reference that I could find, in one sentence. Poseidon, in some spring flowers, got down and dirty with Medusa. That's it. And in this version, she has tusks and wings and
I was
snakes
gonna say
and
Poseidon was being freaky deaky.
all the works. There is nothing to this. And the theogony also mentions the whole Perseus myth, again, summed up in basically one line. When Perseus had cut off the head of Medusa, there sprang from her blood great Chrysaor and the horse Pegasus, so named from the springs of Okeanos, where she was born. Springs being, in ancient Greek, Pegai. So, Pegasus. It's literally her head sprouted blood like a spring. And that's how the horse got its name. I did mention that we have a couple of other versions of this. We actually, like I said, have far more that agree. And so we have a fragment of a play from around the 7th or 6th century BC that also mentions that they are children of Phorcys and Keto. We have Aeschylus's play, Prometheus Bound, which is a Greek tragedy from around the 5th century BC, which also includes the children being just children of Phorcys. And here, there is an additional couple of details that are important just for giving the description that I was mentioning earlier. They are 3 winged sisters, the snake-haired Gorgons. So again, wings, snake hair, sounds pretty straightforward. And that, quote, no one of mortal kind shall look upon and still draw breath. So even from the 5th century BC and presumably earlier, because this is a play written about the mythology that has already existed, you look at Medusa, you dead, turn to stone. That is very clear. We have a Roman mythographer way far away. So at this point, almost an entire millennia from the original literary references that we have. Pseudo-Hyginus has, in his writings of the Roman mythography, claims that the Gorgons are the children of Keto, so same mother, and Gorgon. However, if you look at every single reference to Gorgon, this character, or sorry, Gorgo, not Gorgon, this Gorgo character, all of our references come from the Pseudo-Hyginus. So it might have just been one guy who got confused and said, yeah, the Gorgons, child of Gorgo. That makes sense. Who needs to fact check?
Man, don't you miss those days where you could just say something and be like, "Yeah, I know it's true because, I said it."
Do you believe it now, right? I told you. I
Yeah,
wrote it down. By the way, my
that's
name is
right.
Hyginus. Do you know why I refer to people as pseudo, by the way? So Pseudo-Hyginus is the first time I think we've referenced them, but we've also talked about Pseudo-Apollodorus in the past. And it is because these people used the names of famous authors and mythographers, but we can pretty clearly identify that those people were dead when these books came out. So we don't know who the actual author is because they just wanted to sell more copies and therefore put the name of a famous dead person on there.
That is what is that concept called? I think it's called pseudepigrapha, right? Where you write under the name of somebody else.
That sounds correct. I would call
Look
it
at me being a smart boy.
stolen valor.
Honestly, so true, man.
Stolen
You know
literary
what?
valor.
Fuck these guys.
Well, I appreciate them because they were doing their best to keep down history, even if they're effectively, as I am, writing about myths thousands of years later, or in their case, about 1,000 years later.
No, burn it. Burn it all.
There is a place that you should really go. You'd love it. It's called Alexandria.
Alexandria? I've heard of it.
However, we should now talk about how do you get that cursed? How do you piss off the gods to that extent? And one
What
of
did
the
they
answers
do?
is
Yeah.
truly, hey man, nothing. You're just born that way.
Okay.
Horrifying, I guess.
Uh-huh. You're just an uggo from birth.
And so that is the pervasive version of the myth for a long time. The first written account where it is Athena who curses Medusa comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses. written around 8 AD. So the reason that I point out very specifically that this collection, the epic poem by Ovid, was written at around 8 AD is because 8 AD is around when we believe he was banished from Rome. And so the question then becomes, is his depiction of this event influenced by his own banishment? Some people theorize that it is, and I have even seen people throw around the idea that Medusa was a princess that Poseidon violated, and that is in alignment with some similar deed that Ovid did, having sexual affairs with a princess. There is no historical precedent for that. That's actually just a theory that is purely based on the fact that this version of the myth is different, and that presumably Ovid must have been writing about his own personal experiences and drawing upon that, and it was some sort of critique. I don't know if that, one, we are never going to get a definitive answer. Two, I don't know if that sits well with me personally, just because it's so close to when he was banished, and this is a massive epic poem, and this is like in the middle of it. So he'd been writing for a while, and if it was published even just after he was banished, presumably this part of it would have been written long before he was banished.
Mm.
So hard to say, but Ovid is the first person to write Medusa was violated in Minerva's shrine by the Lord of the Sea. Jove's daughter turned away and covered with her shield her virgin's eyes, and then, for fitting punishment, transformed the Gorgo's lovely hair to loathsome snakes. And that is Ovid's version of the thing. It's pretty short. Medusa was violated in
And
Athena's
she
temple,
got punished.
and she got punished for Poseidon's actions. Ovid does also mention one other detail, which is that at some point Medusa was turned into a bird, and that's why she gives birth to Pegasus, because she was seduced by Poseidon while as a bird. Again, Ovid is the only person who says this, and so
Oh my god.
it's hard to know if this was like a thing that was going around. Maybe people had started saying this in the 1,000 years. Who knows? But
Oh,
Ovid writes it down, and it is now immortalized.
Poseidon, it's because he is a freak. They just
I,
knew that. They're like, regular woman, he doesn't care about that. He wants that cloaca.
I will say, across, if not just across today's myths, across all myths, Poseidon is the freakiest god.
He's
Okay?
the
This man would
god of
get down and
freaks.
dirty with anybody.
Yeah. I guess it makes sense. The sea's kind of freaky. There's a lot of freaky stuff in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, that does make sense. Also, he was in part often associated with monsters and violence because the sea was, as you said, full of
Mhm.
freaky shit and violent. But back to Ovid. Ovid also wrote a collection of poems called the Heroides, which would roughly translate to heroines. So it's a collection of poems all around famous women from mythology. And in there, he actually lists off a long list of Poseidon's lovers, which I did not think would be something we would be talking about. So I don't have the full list. I only cut out the part with Medusa. And he specifically mentions that blah, 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 nor Medusa when her locks were not yet twined with snakes. So this is again an occurrence of Ovid referencing Medusa before she was a snake person. And so the Heroides, we do not have a as clear a picture of when they were published and when they came out. It is assumed that they were from earlier in his career, which would imply pre-banishment, which is also quite notable because it reinforces my earlier point that the myth that he's referencing about Medusa being cursed by Athena probably existed before the Metamorphoses if he was writing about it potentially before he wrote the Metamorphoses in the Heroides. So, there might have been some cultural precedent for this curse that was already floating around. And again, in the Metamorphoses, we can see the full Perseus is actually, he goes to Ethiopia And an Ethiopian chieftain asks Perseus why Medusa was the only one of her sisters with snakes in her hair. And Perseus is like, I shall tell you a long tale of a beautiful woman with many a suitor. And it gets to the part that I have already told you, where he explains she was violated in Minerva's shrine by the Lord of the Sea. And so that is what it is. Pseudo Apollodorus agrees that Athena was the cause of Medusa's curse. Pseudo Apollodorus is a Greek mythographer, so he uses the Greek names, and notably is from later even than Ovid. He's in around the 2nd century AD, sometime in the 100s. And he says it is affirmed by some that Medusa was beheaded because of Athena, for they say the Gorgon had been willing to be compared to Athena in beauty, which is not the same as Ovid. We see the myth continuing to change. So, that's a lot on Medusa and how she got cursed. Now we have to pivot, because from here on out, Medusa's story is not her story. Now her story is the story of Perseus and his major heroic deed, one of which, or the largest of which I should say, is beheading Medusa. So let's talk about where Perseus comes from. Perseus's backstory is across basically every source the exact same. There is a king named Acrisius who is king of Argos, who has a daughter named Danae. Unfortunately, Danae is not a male heir, so Acrisius goes to the Oracle of Delphi and says, "Hey, can you give me any advice?" And the Oracle says, "Oh, I got something for you. You should be really careful because one day you will be killed by your own grandson." So he nods. He says, "Okay, I know exactly what to do. I'm going to take my daughter and I'm going to lock her in a closed room so that no one will ever see her and have sex with her. Cannot happen if she is locked in this bronze, it's often described as a bronze chamber." Pseudo Apollodorus, who was writing way later than most of the other references, mentions that it is specifically a bronze chamber beneath the earth. Some mention towers and places in the palace. It doesn't really matter. She's a woman locked away, and Zeus, presumably tempted by the sheer audacity of any woman that should be sheltered from his specific opportunity to get to, comes to her in the form of a golden shower and fathers her child.
A he pees on her?
Nope, he rains on her with golden rain, clearly. Get your head out of the gutter. What do you think this myth is
Connor.
about?
Connor, Zeus peed on that woman.
Hey, specifically that shower of gold impregnated her. That the myth is very
Yes.
clear about. It is the
Okay,
shower of
understood.
gold that impregnates her.
So Perseus is a pee baby. Understood.
Yup. And Acrisius, having found out that he has a grandson, having specifically been told that he will be killed by his grandson, does the only responsible thing and throws his daughter and grandson out to sea, either in a chest or on an ark. It depends on your source, but the general gist is he puts them somewhere, a box or similar, and throws them out into the ocean. Because you can't just kill your family. That's a big no-no. And the gods and the Furies would have made his life miserable or punished him or killed him, who knows, but it would have been bad. So he can't just kill them. So he throws them out to sea. And unfortunately, the ark drifts ashore. Perseus and Danae wash ashore on the island of Seriphos, where they are taken in by a fisherman, and his name is Dictys. Dictys raises Perseus basically as his own son, and Dictys also happens to be the brother of Polydictes, who is the king of the island. And this has tons and tons of references dating as far back as the Iliad, which is super long ago and one of our very first pieces of literature that we have from this period of time. So we can be pretty certain that this myth was just, they got it right the first time and they did not change it. And so Perseus is given the opportunity to grow up on the island of Seriphos. And throughout this time, while he's there, Polydictes falls in love with Danae. But Perseus always is like, that guy rubs me the wrong way. So he cockblocks Polydictes at every opportunity. Every single one. He will not let her court her. So Polydictes has to think of a plan to get rid of Perseus. So he says, guys, I'm getting married. I am collecting contributions. I am wishing for the hand of Hippodamia, and I am going to make her my bride. And so he asks all of the men on the island, all of his friends, including Perseus, I need a horse from each of you. And he knows that Percy doesn't have a horse. So Perseus says, well, I cannot give you a horse, but you are king, so you name your gift and I'll go get it. And in some versions, later versions, he even goes so far as to say that I would even bring you the head of Medusa if you ask for it. And so Polydictes says, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Or in other versions says, name your gift anything? I would like the head of Medusa. And so Perseus is all of a sudden like, wait, shit, fuck. Oh no. I'm so screwed. I didn't think that they would take that
I'm
literally.
cooked.
And so he prays. He's like, Dad, please help me. I'm gonna die. And he's like, I got you. I'll send your siblings. And so Hermes and Athena come down and they give him a bunch of gifts because he is super underleveled for this dungeon. And so he's going to need all the magical items he can get because otherwise he's going to die. In some versions, he actually gets these items from the Hesperides nymphs after he seeks out the Graiai. We'll get to them. But they give him all the same stuff and he returns them. And generally speaking, people don't dislike him. So it's basically all the same. We're going to run with the version where Hermes gives him winged sandals and Hades' helm of darkness. Athena gives him a polished shield. And sometimes Hephaestus gives him a magic bag that can safely contain Medusa's head. Sometimes Athena gives it to him. I'm going to go with Athena gives him the magic bag because that aligns with my D and Demigods headcanon, and I appreciate that.
I also appreciate that.
Oh, he also gets a curved sword. That's notable because he needs something to cut off her head. And Athena specifically is like, I will guide you. I'll stick with you. I'll give you advice the whole time. The first thing that you have to do is you have to go find the sisters of the Gorgons, the Graiai. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the Graiai are other children of Phorcys who have, and I must be very specific, a single eye and a single tooth that they take turns using. Perseus, being not an idiot, steals their single eye and holds it ransom until they give him the location of Medusa and the other Gorgons. So they do, and Perseus is like, oh boy, now I get to go to the Isle of Sarpedon, and there's a cave, and he is told that in that cave, that's where the 3 Gorgons lie sleeping. And this is where it's important that the other 2 Gorgons are immortal. They cannot die, so he can only kill Medusa. And so he uses the reflective shield from Athena, which is why Annabeth in this chapter mentions it would be better if we had a polished shield. That's because that is specifically what Athena gives to Perseus. And with Athena guiding the sword, he sneaks in and he slices down on Medusa's neck and pop comes out a horse and Chrysaor. So that wakes everybody up because
Understandable.
And so at this point, he pops on his hat of invisibility that he has because he's got Hades' invisible hat. And
You mean
he
his
flies.
helmet?
Yeah, his helmet. It's fine. It's a hat.
I was gonna put a little bit more respect on it. Don't call it a hat.
And so he puts on Hades' helm of invisibility or helm of darkness. And he vanishes and is able to escape from the other Gorgons. In some versions, he also has to fly away from them using the shoes of Hermes, which are faster than the Gorgons' wings, which is a cool little detail and why he needs those. Although those are also very helpful for when he then goes on a side quest, which we won't talk about today. But the short version is he goes to, as I mentioned, Ethiopia. He meets his wife Andromeda, who they've angered Poseidon, and so he's sending a giant sea monster to kill Andromeda. And so Perseus flies up with the shoes and kills the monster either with the head of Medusa by turning it to stone or with the same blade that he cut off Medusa's head as he slices open the giant sea monster. But that's neither here nor there because he's done it. He is successful. He now has his wife. He then returns the objects that were loaned to him and he returns to Seriphos with Medusa's head, which is the gift that Polydictes wanted. And he finds out that while he was gone, his mother had been threatened, abused, and generally gotten the short end of the stick from Polydictes, who is trying to, at this point, he's given up on wooing her, and he is just trying to outright take her
Coerce her, yeah.
forcefully. And so she's seeking refuge in a temple to Athena, and Perseus, outraged, walks into the throne room and is like, hey, I got this thing you wanted. And as soon as he pulls it out, they're all turned to stone. What does that sound like?
I don't know, probably something that'd be a really cool end to the book, though.
Probably something that would be a really cool end of the book. But I do like that it is him and his friends, his court, that also were with Polydictes, just like it's Gabe and his other poker playing friends.
Mhm.
In other versions, Polydictes actually gets the jump on Perseus once he finds out that he's lived and has made it back alive. And Perseus just barely manages to pull out Medusa's head in time to turn him to stone, but the ending is the same. There is another alternate version, followed by Pseudo-Hyginus, in which Polydictes is not a dick. He marries Danae because Dictys, his brother, brings them over, and he's actually just a really protective, nice guy. And in this version, Acrisius, the grandfather, discovers where they are, arrives at Seriphos to kill them, and Perseus is like, no, you needn't worry, old man, I won't kill you. And so Polydictes then dies, and Acrisius shows up to pay his respects, and Perseus, playing in the funeral games, throws a discus and hits Acrisius in the head with it, which kills him. Which brings me to my final point, which is that Acrisius is one of the unluckiest people in mythology, because this guy, in almost every single version, dies to being hit in the head with a stray discus. That's it. That's almost always how he dies. And the one time he doesn't,
canon
he
event.
gets turned to stone with the head of Medusa. This guy is so fucked.
It's gotta happen that way. The story isn't the same without his death.
It's not. And so, and then we'll go back to Medusa. One other detail from Perseus's journey is that while he's on his side quest to find his wife, he flies over Libya. And we have a reference to this from the Argonautica, a separate Greek epic from around the 3rd century BC, so a lot later than some of these other instances, but we also have references from around the 5th century AD of this. But as Perseus is flying over a desert in Libya, the blood that drips from Medusa's head falls onto the sand, and the desert gives new life to the blood as snakes, all sorts of snakes. And this is like a myth as to why this land is filled with snakes. But one of these snakes is described as the two-headed
Yeah.
Amphisbaena.
Yeah, it is.
And so I have to tell you, it took me a long time to figure out where I had gotten this idea for the snakes when we used them in D&D Gods. And I
As a
love that
reminder, just as a brief reminder, because these snakes mean a lot to you and me, Connor, but
yes, they
people have
do.
probably forgotten or are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Connor, these are literally just, they're snakes with 2 heads, so they fork out like a Y, right?
Yes.
And
Yep.
one of the heads will bite its own tail, kind of like an Ouroboros, and they'll roll like a wheel.
So
Hence,
in the
wheel snake.
Dionysica, the Amphisbaena is specifically described as rolling along with a double gliding motion with her head in her mouth. And if you go look at this creature, you will see depictions of it biting its own neck. And I just loved the idea of these stupid two-headed snakes that roll toward their prey.
Rolling down.
And so, yes, in D&D Gods, our campaign, which was based on the world of Percy Jackson, where Jack and some of our other friends got to play as demigods, they were trying to rescue a young new demigod who had just come into their powers, and the satyrs were very busy, and so they couldn't save them. And so they were sent out to this kid's middle school, and it was being attacked by Amphisbaena, these stupid snakes falling from Medusa's head.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
And
I'm
there's
so
basically
the
no
minute
other.
you started saying snakes started to appear, I was like, "It can't be. It
It
can't be the
is!
wheel snakes."
It is the wheel
Oh, that's
snakes. They
phenomenal.
specifically come from Medusa's head, and I love it. There is really so little information on these guys other than they apparently became a very popular thing to include in like bestiaries. And so throughout a lot of ancient history up to medieval times, people are like, "Oh, and you should be wary if you go to Libya, for you might see Amphisbaena, a two-headed snake that has very strong poison. They will roll toward you." And people just kept believing them.
Well, yeah, because nobody was going to Libya to check. They're like, "Fuck, they've got those two-headed snakes there? I'm staying away."
I am not going there to check on that. And so that is the origin of the Amphisbaena, the wheel snakes.
That warms my heart.
I love the wheel snakes. So, how did we get here? How did we get
That's
to this
such a
myth
good question, Connor.
of Perseus slaying Medusa in the first place? I mentioned earlier the idea of the Gorgonion, the practice of putting scary Gorgon faces on things to scare your enemies and protect your things. I mentioned that we have very early references dating as far back to the Iliad, where Agamemnon has an image of a Gorgon on his shield. So many references across mythology and so much art. This is one of the things where we can tell how pervasive it was, because if you go look for art of Medusa and the Gorgons, there is so much of it that has survived on so many different places that you wouldn't expect. But the Perseus Gorgon story then has an interesting origin itself, because we have to ponder which came first, Gorgonea, the practice of putting the Gorgon heads on everything, or the Perseus myth. And unfortunately, it's a real chicken and the egg situation, because it is totally possible that the Gorgonea came first, the idea of putting these heads on everything, and then we needed an origin story for why it's always just a head. And so Perseus has to go and behead the nasty monster, and Athena has to slap it on her shield. Or the story inspired the practice of putting the heads on things, which would make sense entirely. But a third possibility is that they both just independently developed and then kind of merged, which is, again, one of these is not more likely than the other. They're all entirely equally likely, and we just don't have enough information to determine which one is which.
Hmm.
Especially because the idea of this, and it's not quite so similar as like Hermes Caduceus, where we can trace that all the way back to Babylonian mythology, and we can look at that scepter with two snakes on it and go, all right, that is the same thing. But there are depictions of monsters that are fought by Gilgamesh. Specifically, the monster is called the Humbaba, that may have influenced the Perseus Gorgon story, because if you look at Gorgons and their depictions, they are these very similar round-headed, ugly monsters with wild, perhaps snake-like hair. It's not snakes yet, but you could describe it as snake-like. The Humbaba has a big bushy beard, which might influence why we see certain versions of Medusa that have a beard. And again, it's got the tusks, it's got the fangs. Generally speaking, they look very similar. There are also aspects of it that seem to potentially be borrowed from a different Mesopotamian mythology and creature, the Lamashtu, which has the wings and the fangs and the associations with snakes, as it's very dragon-like. But either way, people have been wanting to fight ugly monsters and using the ugly faces of monsters to scare people away for basically as long as there have been humans, it seems like.
Mhm.
So then, my next question is, why by Ovid's time did people think she started as a beautiful lady? Where did that come from?
Dude,
And I
I've
don't
been
have a
thinking the
satisfying
same
answer for
thing.
you.
Damn it!
I wish I did. I have the reigning prevailing theory. And the prevailing theory is another chicken and the egg situation, which is that either the story started shifting first to be more pro Medusa, basically, or that people started making art over time that made her look more and more womanly because they wanted to make things that were pretty to look at. And if you look at it, by the time you get to like medieval art of this depiction, she's always a beautiful lady. It just happens to have snakes for hair. So it is possible that people drawing Medusa over the millennia that occurred between the original versions of the myths and Ovid's version of the myth is that perhaps people just started drawing her in different ways, and Ovid and other authors and writers needed a way to explain why there were versions of the art that were both ugly and pretty. And a situation where Medusa had once been a beautiful woman, she did lay with a god after all, was a pretty straightforward understanding. So, presumably, one of these things happened first and the other followed. And
Yeah, man. Ah,
that's largely the story of Medusa. So
damn.
let's
That's
take a
dense. There's a lot. There's a
there
lot
is a
happening there.
lot there. So let's take a brief step back and let's talk about middle grade fiction again.
Yes.
Let's talk about Percy Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned that I specifically had thoughts on this, and I cannot give credit to creating this theory. This is on the Riordan Wiki, and there it is listed that the version that is in the Percy Jackson novels actually seems to incorporate aspects of both the Greek and Roman versions of the mythologies. So in the Greek version, she is a consensual lover of Poseidon's, same as in Percy Jackson. Probably the right choice for middle grade fiction. And it is the
Uh-huh.
later Roman version in which she is cursed by Athena. So, generally speaking, it seems like Rick picked the items from each that served him and used those. The description that they give is pretty much all bang on, aside from missing the wings. However, in Percy Jackson's Greek gods, she actually is described as having wings of imperial gold. But that's it. That is a lot of Medusa. And that is where we end for today's chapter.
Whew. That was a lot, Connor, both in terms of chapter and myth. But I am here for it. This was super, super fun. Again, the chapters we've read before this, none of what we've read has been bad, I don't think. But this, I think, reigns supreme. So if I were to guess, because I have no memory of what happens next chapter, I think foot is going to be off the gas a little bit. I think that'll be our breathing room. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I am definitely excited to continue on and seeing where this adventure takes our plucky little group.
You think next chapter might give us some breathing room?
Did I make a joke? Did I
Oh,
make a joke on accident?
you did not make a joke. You're just very wrong.
I'm wrong. I'm super incorrect. Oh no.
Next chapter is going to be action packed. I will leave out the spoilers so that Jack can
All
be
right.
reacquainted very well. But let's just say that next chapter, we're going to get some advice from a poodle. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support our content, please be sure to leave a review, share with your friends, and follow us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, this has been Notes from the Oracle. I am excited that you don't remember what's going to happen, Jack. That's delightful.
I have no memory.
This is the midpoint for the novel. It is a big chapter and a lot happens.
Really?
I am thrilled.
Oh man, that's great. Well, this will be my proper like blind read then. Because for the most part, I've remembered the big chunks, but I read the title of the next chapter. I was like, I have no fucking memory of what this is.
I'll be honest with you. I read the title and I went, huh? And then I read the first like 3 lines and I went, oh, I know where we're headed. I
Yeah.
know exactly where we're headed.
Hold on, let me see. Camped out in the woods. I was littered with flattened soda cans. Fest.
Yeah, that doesn't give it away. But as soon as I saw them camping, I knew where they were headed next.
I yeah. I have no
Hey, man, don't
clue.
worry about it. You'll figure it out. They're gonna say the name of a place, and the moment you hear the name of the place, you're gonna go, "Oh, we're doing that."
Yeah.
So, I'm excited, man. It should be a lot of fun. This was a fun chapter. It was honestly, from a, like, breakdown perspective, short and sweet, which you and I don't get a lot of these days, so I appreciate that, and I especially appreciated it because the myth was dense.
Yeah, holy cow. It was
But it
really
was good.
good.
I would say I don't think it's my best
Connor, are
myth
you sure
section.
next chapter's the crazy one? This is only 11 pages. 188 to 196. Not even.
188 to 196. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure.
Something insane is going to happen in this chapter.
Oh no. It is okay. It's chapter 13 where the thing that I think happens. We're just headed there, but we're not at the thing yet.
Uh-huh.
Damn. I look
Now, if you
stupid
want to
now.
leave all that in, we can. I am going to make fun of you next episode.
That's all right. I'll leave in the part where I get very excited. I was wrong. Chapter 12 is them on their way to the big exciting thing, and chapter 13, titled I Plunge to My Death, is where the actual exciting thing happens, as evidenced by the title. But because the poodle is introduced. Oh, the poodle's not even. I'm thinking of the chihuahua. Oh, that's where I got mixed up. Well, join us next time and the time after that for the actual fun thing.
Oh, that means I can't wait. I'm putting a note. I'm putting a note in my book right now. I was right. Mention that.
Oh my god. Yeah, no, you're
I was
right.
like, there's
Chapter
no
12 is
way.
gonna be so boring. I mean, not so boring. Like, it'll be fine. But chapter
Yeah.
12 is a poodle. I'm thinking of a chihuahua. Uh, Echidna, the mother of monsters, she hides a chimera as a chihuahua.
Yes, I remember that.
So I was mixing up the poodle and the chihuahua. That's what was happening.
I put on the in the margin. Remind Connor I was right. Done.